I hope we're not trying to figure out who he is, and more figure out who we are through watching that.
It was the most photographed and videotaped day in history. 2 of the world's tallest buildings destroyed by hijacked planes. The next day, newspapers published photos of the horror. But there were some images so awful, they provoked rage across the world. These were the pictures of people falling. One photo of a falling man was the most controversial of them all. It was branded distasteful, exploitative, voyeuristic. It was never seen again. But some argued that the picture of the falling man needed to be confronted. It not only acknowledged the story of the people who'd been forced to jump, it alone gave a true sense of the horror of that day. The quest to identify one man became a quest to give name and voice to that horror. A journey to help America learn and recover from its darkest day. At the point of impact, temperatures were reaching over 1,000 degrees centigrade. As the flames consumed everything in sight, the smoke was becoming increasingly toxic. In desperation, windows were broken to let in fresh air. For some people, there was only one option left.
I was standing between a police officer and a woman EMS worker, and all of a sudden the woman says, "Oh, look," and she pointed up, and we both looked up, all 3 of us looked up, and the people started coming down from the World Trade Center. Bodies were falling, so I instinctively picked up my camera and started taking pictures. That's what I do. It's like a carpenter, you know, he has a hammer, he builds a house, I have a camera and I take pictures.
Broadcasters were pulling back. They weren't showing the people falling, they were reporting them.
People are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess, because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
It's going to explode.
At 9:58, the South Tower fell, extinguishing in an instant the hopes of hundreds inside. The photographer Richard Drew caught the moment.
I think the camera is sort of a filter for me between me and what I'm photographing, and I'm only seeing what's coming through my lens, and that helps me sort of separate it, I guess, psychologically.
What Drew didn't realize was that it already captured an image so shocking, so representative of the horror of the day, that it would ignite controversy and anger across the world.
There were things that were so big that were falling. And it was terrifying and horrifying to think I didn't recognize the objects I was seeing as people. Maybe that thought was just too horrendous, too horrifying to me.
Others did see what was happening. Lonely, 10-second journeys. A very public way of dying. A couple of hours later, the photographer Richard Drew was back at the Associated Press newsroom at Rockefeller Center. He was now methodically working his way through the images he'd shot. Within minutes, Drew's falling man joined thousands of images arriving in newsrooms across the world. Among them was the Morning Call, a typical mid-sized American newspaper based in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
My first reaction to it was horror. I knew it was happening. There were reports of it on television, but TV stations weren't showing bodies falling from the tower.
My mind right away went to, are we going to print this? And I felt we wanted to print it, but could the person be identified, you know? First thing I tried to do is look very closely to see, and I couldn't.
You feel like it's a private moment. You feels almost obscene looking at this. You feel like you're taking away the person's humanity a little bit. I said I had the same reaction to the Eddie Adams photo where the South Vietnamese police chief stepped up to the Viet Cong prisoner, put the pistol to his head and shot him in the temple. It's just the last moment of a person's life.
Naomi was very passionate about the photo. She believed there are photos in history that are flashpoints that really kind of get at the truth. I mean, they're hard to look at, but there are certain photos that just tell the story. And in this case, it got to the humanity in a way that other photos, even that might be more graphic, would not.
I saw grace. I saw a stillness, even though I know that he was falling. I saw a quietness in that, as opposed to a loud, horrible, burning death. You know, you have to know, going into this, that you're going to get reader response, and it's going to be heavy and it's going to be angry. And a lot of it can be misdirected anger, but we get it.
We had more response on this photo than I believe we've ever seen on any photo published, and a passionate response, and that's saying a lot.
When you saw that photograph, you immediately knew that this person had thought those thoughts, had made his decision, and acted on it.
I really think it did cause anybody who looked at that photo to think about that. What would I do? I thought about that myself. You know, what choice would I make? And the absolute horror of making that choice. And I think maybe that's the personal space that we went to with some people, where they thought about what would their personal choice be. We have not run it since that day, since September 12th.
The photo had disappeared from public view in a remarkable, spontaneous act of self-censorship. Newspapers and magazines decided not to run it again. No one wanted to confront the existence of the jumpers. But Tom Junod, a prize-winning writer on American culture, could not stop looking. He felt the falling man was the defining image of September the 11th, and decided to investigate why the jumpers had been airbrushed from the day.
I talked to the coroner's office in New York. I asked them for a count of how many people jumped that day. And what the woman from the coroner's office said was, nobody jumped that day. They were blown out. They were forced out. We don't say that they jumped. Nobody jumped. That just made me feel that there was just something going on that was not familiar American territory about dealing with tragedy. There were just things about that day that you weren't supposed to say, you weren't supposed to see, you weren't supposed to talk about. And for me, that resistance wound up centering on and attaching itself to Richard Drew's picture.
Junod was not alone in his curiosity. A few days after the image was published, a Canadian journalist was asked to identify the falling man.
An editor called me with what I thought was a ludicrous request. He wanted me to find out who the man was and tell his life story. And my first thought was, good luck. You know, I don't think it's possible to get the identity of one person in an image like that. But I decided to try.
The worst ever act of terrorism directed at the United States on domestic soil, and it may not be.
She was on the 79th floor, so everything around them had collapsed already.
If I don't find him, I have to start all over again. It's taken me my entire life to find him, and I don't know what I will do without him.
But no one wanted to lay claim to the falling man. Cheney came across a poster of a missing man in a white jacket.
I had this instant sort of recognition. I thought it looked like the man in Richard Drew's picture.
The number led to Milagros Hernandez, she and her family had pinned hundreds of posters across New York, desperate for any news about her brother Norberto. He worked at Windows on the World.
I asked her if she and her family had seen the picture in the newspaper. She said yes. And I said, "Did you think it was your brother?" She said yes. I said, "Well, I'd like to tell his story."
Norberto's wife and 3 daughters refused to accept that the image was Norberto. It flew in the face of their family motto, together forever, and their faith.
I'll say it as is. Once a person commits suicide, their soul automatically goes to hell with no questioning. We weren't the most religious family, but we had our beliefs and we went to church. So by you calling him the jumper, you're kind of saying that his soul is damned. You're telling me he's in hell. I think that's mostly what got to my mom. That's what got to me too.
What do we stand to gain by identifying this person? What's the purpose of this? Why this exercise in trying to look at this photo and understand who's in it? What will we ever know about this photograph that it doesn't already say on its own?
There was an element of exclusion, that he died improperly, that we want to remember this day for its heroism. And whether we think of the jumpers as heroic or not, they should not be excluded from the consecrated ground of American soil because they died in a way that makes us uncomfortable.
Junot was convinced that America needed to confront the falling man, a harrowing symbol of 9/11, instead of pretending he didn't exist. He then found someone who provided justification for his mission. Someone who'd found comfort and peace by accepting that his loved one may have jumped.
It had to be so intense up there, and there was no other way out, that it was either burn alive or go quickly. I envisioned that it had to be the towering inferno. And from the photos I saw, it obviously was. Who knows how much smoke was in there? You know, do you suffocate to death or do you jump? I think it was brave to do that. When the media started posting photographs, then I started searching to see if Karen was one of those jumpers. I know it's her because the clothes and the shape, I would know her from a shadow. She had a blue sweater top on, sleeveless, and cream-colored pants. If you look at the pictures that I have, I mean, that's what I see. I finally, have something I can hold on to here. This is where she was, and this is how she died. She jumped. She didn't burn up. She didn't become dust. Nothing is more painful than losing her. But not knowing how I lost her was even more painful. So now that I believe that that's what took place, it's not painful for me to talk about it.
While speaking to the family, Junot was shocked to realize that none of them had ever looked at the original photo. The thought had been too painful. Here was an opportunity to confirm, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Norberto was not the falling man. He tentatively asked Catherine whether she wanted to look. She leapt at the chance.
As soon as I saw the picture, I was like, this is my dad. The facial and the color, it wasn't him. You could immediately tell it wasn't him.
Suddenly, Eulahia was over our shoulder. She had come out and she said, "Let me see those."
I was curious. I had to see it. I had to see it. It was obvious it wasn't him. From that day, everything changed at home. Everything changed. I changed. I was no longer in such a bad way. Before that, I was in a bad way. In a very bad way.
When Peter Chaney did his story of the falling man, he thought he could see the face of the man and that he could see details that were enough. Chaney looked at that picture, saw the black pants, and said that he was a kitchen worker. But in fact, most kitchen workers in New York, at least, don't wear black pants. They wear these black and white check pants. But in fact, Norberto was a chef and would not have been wearing black pants. So I don't know who it is. But I do know it's not Norberto Hernandez.
But Junot did agree with one thing in Cheney's article. The falling man had come from windows on the world.
I felt like it was my duty and my responsibility to help identify this person if I could. There might be somebody out there who would want to know that their father was in this picture, or their brother, or their son.
I was very nervous before I looked at the pictures. I was hopeful and terrified at the same time that I would know who it was. I guess in some ways I did want to know if it was one of our people, but I really didn't want it to be one of my people.
Then, a breakthrough. The chef, Michael Amanico, agreed to look at the photos. A few days later, over lunch, he met with the researcher who had with him the pictures and the names that refused to go away.
No, it can't be Charlie Morrow. Can't be Wilder. What about Junior? Can't be Junior. What about Jonathan? And he stopped. Michael took a real close look. It took a while for him to be ready to speak to me about that.
Jonathan was Jonathan Briley. He was a sound engineer who looked after conferences and functions at the restaurant.
It offered me no comfort to think, oh, that's Jonathan. If it is Jonathan, I can only feel so bad for him having to have suffered the way he did. And, you know, I miss him. He was somebody that I would have liked to have known forever.
When I first looked at it, it was almost like touching a hot stove.
But for Gwendolyn, the identity of the falling man didn't matter. She understood that it symbolized something far more significant than a single individual.
I never thought of the falling man as Jonathan. I thought of him as a man that just took his life in his hand for just that second. I hope we're not trying to figure out who he is, and more figure out who we are through watching that.
The man's identity didn't matter. The power of the image came, not because the falling man could be identified, but because he couldn't.
What that day needed more than anything else was essentially what a lot of other wars had, which was a tomb for the unknown. What makes the tomb of the unknown soldier so poignant is the fact that he is unknown. It's not the fact that that I identified, it's the fact that one has been made to stand for many. When Richard took that picture, I believe that he took a picture that really stood as the tomb of the unknown soldier for that day.
Tom Junot's quest had revealed just how important the falling man was. The image didn't insult those who died. Rather, it was a fitting and just memorial to them, because it forced the world to acknowledge and remember the terrible events of that day.
One of the reasons why I became so determined to plumb the meaning of the falling man was that we can't hope to understand these incredible times unless we look at these images and accept the witness of these images. I mean, I think that looking at the falling man and to discuss it is the only option that we have, given that there is a falling man.